We got an update on the Cody Bellinger front, and the Blue Jays, according to Jeff Passan, are more likely now to get him than they were in previous weeks. So we'll break that down on this episode of Jays Digest, as well as Vladimir Guerrero Jr. The case has finally been put to bed. He won his arbitration case. He's going to be getting $19.9 million next year. And what does this mean for the Blue Jays? We'll have that and much more coming up next. I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, alongside host Nick Gosse. Now, Cody Bellinger has been a name that we've heard brought up multiple times throughout this offseason. Weren't sure whether the Jays were in on him, whether they were out on him, kind of just doing their due diligence. Weren't sure if they were serious about getting the former MVP, the guy who had a great bounce back year last season. I mean, he's a very good player, but he's got a hefty price tag attached to his name, so I could see why that's scaring away a lot of teams around Major League Baseball. But Nick, he's a very good player, would definitely slot into the middle of this Blue Jays order, if not as a leadoff hitter, and he would help out a lot of their offensive woes. I don't know if the Jays are serious about making it happen.
Yeah, no one was really talking about it, and then Jeff Passan decided to stir it back up today. Quick reminder to hit the subscribe button before you get into it. We're on the road to 12,000. Now, Peter, two big topics to discuss. We'll start with the Passan one, and then we'll get into the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. one. So this kind of dropped out of out of nowhere, and he was basically on a radio show, and he went on to say that on ESPN 1000, I just feel like the Toronto Blue Jays need Cody Bellinger more than the Cubs do. And he goes on to say the Blue Jays front office and their failures of getting Ohtani and Yamamoto and others leads him to believe Toronto could eventually get desperate for Bellinger and pay that extra price, essentially, that no other team is willing to pay. He also goes on to say he thinks the Cubs are going to sign one of the guys, doesn't think the Jays are going to be in on Matt Chapman. But if the price comes down for a shorter-term deal on the bottom regarding Bellinger, he thinks the desperation might be necessary there for the Blue Jays in a way that it wasn't before. Now, we've kind of known some of this. We suspected that maybe the Jays would be in on him if the price drops. And him saying this means that I think that he would predict that, again, we kind of predicted as well. If the price drops, the Jays could be going for him. And it seems like what's happening is that the price is dropping because no one is willing to pay $200, $250 for Cody Bellinger.
Yeah, I understand that. I do. But Cody Bellinger, I think he's worth it, man. I think he's worth it. And it might not work out in the long run. Those last few years, this deal might not be great, but he's only 27, 28 years old. So it's not like you're signing some 32-year-old to this long 8-year deal. It would be a 27-year-old former MVP who bounced back last year and showed that he could be that player that he was in LA in his early days. So I'm all in on this. I've been all in on it all off season long, and I think it's something that the Blue Jays do need to do. There is desperation right now because the Yankees got significantly better by acquiring Juan Soto. The Baltimore Orioles got a lot better by acquiring Corbin Burns, and we mentioned this in a video a couple days back, Nick. I don't see anyone in this lineup besides maybe Vladdy, Bo, and George Springer that can actually duel against Corbin Burns. I don't see anyone in this lineup that can go toe-to-toe with that guy on the mound because this stuff is that nasty. And if you add Cody Bellinger into the lineup, then I think you have yourself a guy who can add to that and someone who can kind of go toe-to-toe with Corbin Burns and some of the elite right-handed pitchers that we have in the AL East, like a Garrett Cole and whatnot. So I think the Blue Jays are desperate at this point. Maybe that's why they were saving the $1.9 million that they didn't want to give to Vladdy. Who knows? Who knows? Whatever the situation may be, there is desperation right now, and the clock is ticking, and the Blue Jays still have some holes to fill. So who better to fill it with than that former MVP and a guy who hit over 300 last year, swiped 20 bags, hit over 20 home runs? I mean, it's a perfect fit in my eyes.
Yeah, maybe the desperation is even more so there, like you mentioned, because of Corbin Burns going the other way and the Yankees things and all that happening. 881 OPS last year. And this was an interesting tweet here. It says if the Jays were 100% out on Bellinger, he'd be a Cub already. They must have enough interest. That's what a lot of people are saying. Is that if I think you may have mentioned it, or maybe it was me in the past, like if he was so sure about being a Cub, if the Cub offered him the money that he wanted, he would be a Cub by now, you would presume. But the fact that it's dragging out this far regarding Cody Bellinger, I think definitely helps the Blue Jays more than it helps any of the other teams. And now that they see the AL East get better, you would have to presume, like Jeff Passan says at the bottom, he doesn't think the desperation might be there as much for the Cubs as it is for the Blue Jays, specifically regarding Bellinger. I mean, the Cubs could pivot to Matt Chapman, Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery, any of those guys, but Bellinger, 7, 8 years, the Cubs do not want to do it. I mean, if the Jays were to offer 7 or 8 years for Bellinger, they could probably have him right now. It just doesn't seem like they want to do that, which, again, may be a bit unfortunate, but it doesn't seem like anyone in the market wants to do that. So any quick final thoughts on this before I wrap up? It kind of came out of nowhere, but it's nice to see the Jays might not be done quite yet. Big fish fishing.
Yeah, well, there is definitely desperation on the Blue Jays side because they have different expectations than the Chicago Cubs do. And of course, the Cubs spend a lot of money and they want to compete for a World Series, but I don't know if they're there yet. And there's levels to this. We know this. The Blue Jays are kind of in that middle where they're not quite a surefire World Series contender, but if they get hot at the right time, they could be. And the Cubs, I just don't see them being in that same realm as the Blue Jays. Obviously, we know that the Jays have fell flat on their faces in the past couple of postseasons, and they haven't met expectations. But they're in the dance. They get there every single year, pretty much. So they have a better chance right now than the Cubs do of going all the way. But they haven't done anything to address any of their problems. So without doing that, they're kind of in the same spot where if they do manage to sneak into the playoffs, we're probably talking about an early playoff exit if guys don't perform up to their standard, and they haven't for the past couple of seasons here. So are we really banking on that? So why not go out and get a former MVP? It doesn't really matter the price tag. It doesn't matter the amount of years. I understand it's easier said than done when it isn't your money on the table here. But at the same time, you got to sell this team to the fan base, and you're asking for 150% increase in ticket prices with the new renovations. So you got to fill those seats somehow, and you got to get fans in the building. And how do you do that? It's with marquee players like Cody Bellinger and having good bounce back seasons out of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and George Springer. That's how you get seats filled in the building, and I'm sure the Jays know that, and they got to address those problems.
Yeah, and we'll see what they ultimately do, but good for Jeff Passan to give some hope for some Jays fans. But let's move on quickly now to Vladdy wins his arbitration case. We didn't really know which way this was going to go, and it went in the direction, I guess, and the victory was given to Vladimir Guerrero Jr. here. And by winning his arbitration case, Vlad also sets himself up for a bigger payday in 2025. His raise will now be added under the bigger number of $19.9 million. After that, he's slated to hit free agency, and they only tried to offer him a modest $3.55 million. He ended up getting around a $5. I mean, we kind of discussed our thoughts on this yesterday, especially regarding a potential extension going forward. But do you have any thoughts on the fact that he won his arbitration case? I mean, maybe this could be seen as better for the Blue Jays, at least for us as fans, because there's hopefully there'll be no bad blood. I don't think it's a pretty common thing, but I want an extension to be done and bigger payday for 2025 if he does end up getting extended. Who knows?
It is a very common process, but you tend not to want to do this with your star players. And I know Vladdy's had his down seasons, but you're really finagling over $1.9 million. It's just not smart business if you're the Toronto Blue Jays. You want to keep this guy in town for the long haul, or maybe they don't. Maybe they don't. But then my question to the Blue Jays front office is who's better? Who's out there that is going to be better than Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? Even in his down seasons, he's better than 85% of Major League Baseball. So that's the question here. Like, okay, maybe you don't want to commit all that money to him. You don't want to commit all that term to him. But who's out there on the market that's going to be better than what Vlad will give you on a year-to-year basis? The answer is not much. Really, that's the answer right there. So arguing over 1.8, 1.9 million dollars in an arbitration dispute, it doesn't make sense to me. And yeah, this does cause like some burned bridges between sides. Maybe Vladdy is not as tight as he thought with the Blue Jays front office, and that could be problematic going forward when it comes to contract negotiations. So I've never been a fan of this process. I think it's toxic for both the team and the player. And I just hope that this doesn't get in the way of an actual extension when the time does come in a couple of years.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't. And I mean, at the end of the day, Vlad won, so maybe we'll never know if there was burned bridges until after the fact. But let's hope that everything is good on that front and that the Jays can maybe extend him after next season before he hits free agency in 2025. But that'll wrap up the video. Let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on all of this, and if you think that Cody Bellinger will be a Toronto Blue Jay. We can get our hopes up, but we don't know for sure. If you want to check out our video from yesterday, click on your screen now, and we will see you tomorrow.